Hello, everyone, and welcome to Faddom's webinar, Mastering IT Migrations. I'm Matan, Head of Marketing at Faddom, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So a little bit of introduction. So without any further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce our incredible lineup of speakers. We have here Ofer Regev, our Chief Technology Officer at Faddom. We have Itamar Rotem, Chief Product Officer at Faddom. And we have our special guest, Mark Barker, Senior Director of Services and Support and Strategy at ePlus. Say hi, guys.
Hi, everybody.
How are you?
Hey. Hi, everyone.
Perfect. So I'm going to overview a little bit the agenda. So this webinar is packed with valuable insights. And here's what we're going to have in our agenda. We're going to start with Mark Barker that will elaborate on the topic of common server migration pitfalls. Afterwards, Ofer and Itamar will give us a quick overview of Faddom solution. And they will also show us a live demo of Faddom and our new migration model. Then we go back to Mark to talk about preventable pitfalls with application dependency mapping and do's and don'ts for cloud migration. And of course, we're going to have a live Q&A session. So feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A panel as we go along. We'll make sure to address them at the main session. Cool. So to start, Mark will walk us through some of the most common server migration pitfalls and how to avoid them. Mark, over to you.
All right, thank you, Matan. So real quick, like Matan said, my name is Mark. I work at ePlus Technology, a global IT services company supporting most of the globe, specifically though, obviously the United States and East and West Coast, UK, and India. I have derived this list of common server migration pitfalls from my experiences of doing these kind of migrations, along with the engineers on my team. So I run a number of teams, but one of the ones that's pertinent for today is that we run an assessments team and a cloud migration team. And so I've asked them, guys, team, over the years, we've done enough of these now. What do you see in the field as the most common server pitfalls that your customers typically run into, and what happens and how can we address those? So what I want to do real quickly is just kind of run you through what we feel are like roughly the top 10 pitfalls that we see in the field. And obviously, as we have questions, Matan, are we going to take questions live or are we going to wait till the end? Wait to the end. I think I read his list right to the end. Okay. So yeah, just put your question in the chat and we'll get to it in the end as we're going through this. So first and foremost, the biggest common pitfall that we see is, as you can imagine, inadequate planning. And this is just, as you had mentioned, a lot of times this is beyond your control. A higher level of management comes to you and says, hey, we need to be out of our data center into the cloud, into another solution by X date. And as a result, you aren't aligned and to have and map out the proper way to get this done in a meaningful way, right? So you get rushed, and as a result, mistakes happen and it goes sideways quickly. So first and foremost, you have to push back and say that you need enough time to adequately plan what you're trying to accomplish and make sure that you're in place to get it done successfully. Compatibility issues. So now you're talking about, okay, how compatible is your environment currently for the solution that you're moving to? Your mismatched OSs, your database, your software versions, are they all up to date? Are they the newest versions? Because depending upon where you're moving, some cloud providers will only support certain OSs going forward. They don't go back to an XP. You can't move 2012. There's certain server versions that you can't move to certain cloud versions, and you need to know what that is in order to understand what your path to getting compatible with that solution would be. Once again, data loss and corruption. What happens if you suffer from missing files, database integrity issues? How do you recover from that? What is your plan to move forward if there is an issue that arises? You have to have that planned out. You have to know what your solution entails. You really need as pristine an on-prem solution as you can have in order to migrate it successfully. Trying to just lift and shift what you have today into a cloud is, number one, very, very expensive, and number two, usually not going to be successful. It's just there's too many gotchas there for that aging environment to do that with. Poor downtime mitigation, phase migration planning. What are your wave groups? What are your move groups? Which servers are you going to move together? And how do you know which servers that you should move together based on their dependencies and of the other servers and the other infrastructure in that environment? What current server vulnerabilities are you potentially having? We can tell you, what versions of IIS are you running? What versions of TLS are you running? What versions of, all these security components in your environment do you have today? Are there vulnerabilities? Do we need to worry about patching that before we move to the cloud or to another solution? Performance degradation, resource misallocation, and latency issues, all things that we need to understand. What are your network bandwidth speeds? How much traffic are you sending from one server to another server? What are your resources as far as are they over provisioned or under provisioned? Do you have too many CPUs, not enough CPUs, too much memory, not enough memory? All these things need to be taken into account from at the very least, a cost savings perspective, so that you can move it to the adequate size VM into the cloud. DNS. You want me to repeat the yes, insufficient backup strategy. Sure, must have been no worries. So is insufficient backup strategy. Do you currently have a good backup strategy in place for your on-prem today? Right? Do you have tested backups and restore procedures that work today? Because there's pretty good chance that as you're migrating this from one location to another, something's going to happen. Some data is going to get corrupted. There's going to be a byte that gets missed, and you have to restore that solution back to on-prem. And if that's the case, you want to make sure you have a tried and tested solution that you know will work, so that you don't lose any additional time. DNS and configuration is also another huge red flag that can come up. DNS can be just the bane of our existence in normal day-to-day life, much less when we're looking to move to the cloud. So knowing what that looks like, making sure your DNS is healthy, and working through any issues you may have currently, and fixing those before you move, will save you a whole lot of headaches into the migration process. Licensing is another one. How is your licensing scheme going to work versus on-prem versus the cloud? Because cloud, whole different set of licensing structures that you need to look in. Are you going to bring your own licensing? Are you going to utilize the cloud service provider's licensing method? Are you using SQL on-prem? What are you going to do with SQL when you move to the cloud? So you have a whole host of SQL and licensing, overall licensing conversations that you need to have and understand the cost and what that impact will be from moving on-prem, as you are today, to the cloud. And then last, but certainly not least, your lack of post-migration testing. Once everything has been migrated to the cloud, or at least the wave group or the move group that you're working on currently, testing that wave group and move group to make sure that everything came up as you expect, and that there aren't any unintended consequences like communications that are trying to traverse back through the firewall to your internal infrastructure, causing a whole host of issues and havoc there. So understanding that your testing beginning, testing in the middle, testing at the end, having a backup strategy that works, testing that out, and of course, absolutely making sure that you have enough planning to get this done correctly. So with that, I will turn it back over.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think that this is a great list of things, and one of the things we want to cover today in today's webinar is how we can help in Faddom, and especially with the migration planning phase, which is most of the time, we consider it as 80% of the actual workload that you need to take into account and what you need to do. So I'll share my screen. If you can just mute yourself, that would be amazing, because I hear a little bit of noise. Thank you. And I'll share my screen. If I take it into, take this list into an actionable insight that we can provide in Faddom, I think that a basic thing we need to understand is what are we doing in Faddom? What exactly are we doing when we're saying application dependency mapping solution, and how we can take it into account when we are planning for migration, and how we are going to wrap it all into a dedicated module, which we're going to present in just a few minutes. I would just like to remind you all that you are able to ask any questions you have in the Q&A chat. We're going to answer everything in the end, so feel free to ask anything you have. So in Faddom, what do we do exactly? So Faddom started as a business application dependency mapping solution, which is a very big word. But eventually we are like discovery on steroids. We are able to discover all different types of assets within your infrastructure, whether you have some servers on-prem, physical, or even in the cloud, combining them all automatically to a single point of a business application map, which is hybrid and dynamic. That means that once it's being built, you don't need to, do any changes manually. You don't need to configure those things, or working with Visio file, or just exporting multiple files at once. We are able to build those business application maps. And why is it so important for migration? Is because we are planning for those migration waves, as Mark mentioned. We want to make sure we are focusing on the right aspects in our infrastructure, the most critical one, and make sure that we have no issues with it, that nothing will break when we are planning for migration. And it doesn't even matter if it's on-prem to cloud, or even kind of a use case that we are hearing lately is going back from cloud to on-prem, or even data center transformation. It all, everything is related. So our main use cases, just in general, obviously our focus for today is the migration planning and the migration module that we are about to show you, is that we start with the discovery. We're discovering all types of assets from cloud, on-prem, physical. We are not using any agents to do it. The deployment is very quick, and it's an on-prem product. So all the data will be on your side, on your environment. Nothing is going out of Faddom, of your environment. And this allows us to, and you eventually, to use it for change management, tracking and documenting all types of assets, connections, and dependencies in real time, building your application maps. Also allows you, as Mark mentioned as well, to optimize, take into account all the different resources, and if you have some instances in the cloud, how you can save costs, because those things are a bit hidden at most places. And in Faddom, we analyze all the traffic constantly, so we are able to help with optimization, which also leads us to the migration planning, which this is our focus for the next few minutes as well, and in the demo. So we'll show you our approach of how to build a properly managed migration wave within Faddom, and you can take it to the actual project scope. And lastly, it's cybersecurity. We try to bridge the gap between the IT department and CISO and the security teams in terms of discovering software, CVEs, vulnerabilities, and also analyzing the traffic, the north-south traffic, in addition to the east-west within the application themselves, and take everything into account. So we are able to analyze this traffic, trigger any alerts regarding SSO certificates, and even shadow IT, some servers with little to no traffic. This is just the high in the sky view of Faddom. If we talk a little bit about discovery, so I mentioned the ability to build application maps. We are also able to assist with physical network mapping as well, to discover all switches and routers within the organization. Change management, knowing the impact, and that's a core functionality when we talk about the ability to plan and build a migration wave cleverly. So we want to know the impact, not only on between servers, but also between applications. So we won't forget anything that we left behind. And it allows us to keep track of all the changes within the application map easily and automatically, alongside some root cause analysis use cases to investigate different things that happened within the environment, different things in traffic, users that logged in times, or that something really bad happened in the environment. So we're tracking this as well. And migration, which is our key use case for today. So we're going to talk briefly. Ofer is going to show you a full demo of the migration wave and how we built it. So it allows us to plan for any types of migration, as I mentioned, on-prem to on-prem, on-prem to cloud, vice versa, and any type of data center transformation planning, and also help you with your DR planning. Okay, so this is very important and crucial for the business continuity use case. As for optimization, we're going to cover it as well in the demo. We're going to show you a little bit how we analyze whether you have some infrastructure on-prem or in the cloud, all the resources that Faddom can help you reduce based on the network analysis that we are conducting in real time constantly. And also for the cloud, where costs can be very, very high. So we are able to show you exactly what are the spots that Faddom can save you and provide you with a clear ROI of using us. So that's key as well. In terms of cyber, it's not our focus for today. We're going to have a dedicated webinar on the cyber aspects, but Faddom, as I mentioned, we're doing kind of building a bridge between the IT and the CISO and the security teams, so we are able to help with many of those use cases. It's a little bit less relevant for this webinar in particular, but just so you know a little bit about Faddom and what we do in our approach. So I think without further ado, I'll hand over the mic to my colleague, Ofer, our CTO, for a full demo and to end on the migration wave.
Thanks, Itamar. Just a little warning here. Some of you who may already be familiar with Faddom will notice that the screens I'm showing are a bit different than the ones you have already. That is, since this is actually a pre-release version. So the pre-release version, which has not been released yet. So just a bit of a background. Faddom, of course, is installed on-premise inside your environment. It's not a SaaS solution, so all the data remains in your environment. It starts off where you'll deploy it and connect it to the different data sources you have, whether the cloud environments, hypervisors, network infrastructure. So you start with that to collect all the data. Once you have that, it's going to start collecting all the network data in real time using different network statistics protocols and integrations via APIs with your environment. And I've done a search here just to kind of see what kind of information you'll get. So each of these circles is a server. We've got the arrows showing the dependencies between them. We collect this information over time, and we see this live. So, this is all the dependencies between servers in your environment. We've got the different colors, the status of the connection. So we've got the green ones, which are active, gray, which we saw before, and red, which is an attempt to communicate that's failing. Again, very basic in terms of the core of what Faddom does. And from here, you can drill down and see the server's behavior over time. So that's just a very brief overview. We'll go through a bit more features here. But the first thing, if we're talking about migrations, of course, is if I want to take a server, let's say this Apache 1 server here, and I'd want to extract it, take it out of the environment and see everything that would be affected. First tool we have here is migration assessment, when I can right click on this server and I can get a list of all the dependencies for this server and how much traffic is going over each of these connections over time, looking at average amount of traffic. From here, I'll also be able to add them to migration waves, but we'll get into that a bit later. Now, the network can be a big mess. Lots and lots of connections, and this is a very small demo environment. It's also already hard to read. That's where we have lots of tools in Faddom to help you organize this in a way that makes sense, whether it's taking a specific search result and saving that as an application, or by building application maps of all kinds for business flows, like from the clients through load balancers, web applications, databases, where you can build these kind of application maps like we have for the ERP application here. We can see an end-to-end flow of this application. And these application maps are not static. We'll detect changes on them and we'll show you different, whatever changes since we last created the map. We can see that there's these purple lines here are new connections. We can see a list of changes. So we can keep track of the applications that way. And then we'll be able to use these applications later when we want to migrate. Just another tool I'll go through before we get into that is the migration itself is the subnet dependencies, where this is going to give you kind of like a top-down view of your network, all the different subnets and the different groups. We've got the production environment, the DMZ environment, where I can drill down into them and see the different VLANs and also go down and see what is exactly happening within the VLANs. So this is if we want to migrate let's say an area of the network, for instance, a specific subnet, so we can see all the views here with all the dependencies, all the traffic going between these subnets that I could also drill down into and see exactly what traffic is going between them. So once we have our applications set up, we can use them to help plan migrations. First of all, the first step when we want to plan for a migration, you want to know more or less how much this is going to cost. We want a very quick overview. This screen here, the quick assessment, I can select, let's say, for example, I want to take my VMware environment and I want to move it to Azure, and I will get a very quick assessment of how much this will cost me in terms of CPU, memory, storage. It doesn't have to be to the cloud. Maybe I want to move it to a different hypervisor if I want to move it between clouds from AWS, let's say, to Azure, or any kind of migration where we can help you plan for capacity. And also, of course, when you're going to move something, you're not going to move them all at once. Because large environments, it's basically impossible to move everything at the same time, at least. So for that, we have migration waves. where I can create a new wave. And let's just give this one a name. And let's select our migration target. Let's say we want to move to AWS. Let's go for US East. And we're going to move our ERP application, which we saw earlier. First of all, I'm going to get an overview of this application, of this wave, all the servers that are in it. I have the list of the servers here, with a sizing recommendation for each one of them. Now, it's important to note that this is not a one-to-one sizing. We are doing sizing based on the performance that we're seeing that this server requires. We collect this information from the different platforms. We have performance data on each of these. We can see how much CPU and memory they have, how much they're utilizing out of that. And then with that information, we are already doing sizing and recommending an instance type for each one. We're also connected with all the main cloud providers, and we're getting up-to-date pricing information on all of them so that you can get pricing information that is up-to-date and accurate. Another important thing to note here is the network costs. Since our data comes from the network and we start from the network, we know how much data is going between the environments, and we can also give you an assessment on how much that is going to cost you as well, something that's not available in most tools. The most important part of this, and of course, though, is the dependencies. If I'm going to take this ERP application and I'm going to move it to a different environment, I need to know what I'm going to break. What are the servers that are relying on this? What kind of traffic is going between them? So this is kind of like a list of the firewall rules I would need to open between my current environment and the one I'm migrating to. In this case, from my VMware environment to AWS. I also see how much traffic each of these servers is using. And if I see a server that is using a lot of traffic, maybe I'll decide that I want to add this server into the wave. Of course, this will change my dependencies, and they're automatically calculated. And then I have a whole new list of dependencies here and an updated cost and everything that goes with that as well. So this is going to show me all the dependencies. And down here, I also have infrastructure dependencies. You know, something like a DNS server is something that I would probably not migrate, but I would have a different either managed service, or I would have a different DNS server in the cloud. And this is all, and you could also customize these into use the kind of infrastructure dependencies that are relevant for your use case. Of course, once I'm done with my waves, I can go back. I can see a list of all of them, and I can also keep track of the status of all of them, whether I can say this one is in progress, or maybe it's ready to migrate or on hold. And I can build multiples of these waves, move servers between them, and plan my migration project using that. So we also get a view of the dependencies that can help us select which applications and servers would be the best candidates for migration, and also get an assessment of how much it would cost and what would break if we did it. The idea, of course, is to prevent something from breaking, because you will know all the dependencies ahead of time. Also around migration, of course, you need to know what you want to migrate, but it's also important to know what you don't want to migrate. That's also where we help with finding inactive servers. Any kind of server in the environment that we're seeing, they might have been part of a project that is not in use anymore. Maybe a server that was forgotten about, but we're still seeing traffic from it, usually on different standard ports like DNS, NTP. We'll be able to identify these servers and then let you know, hey, we don't see these servers communicating at all. Maybe there's candidates that you don't need to migrate them. You can just leave them behind and save money. And of course, around optimization, when we're going to migrate a server, or if we've already migrated a server and it's running, how is that server utilizing the resources that were allocated to it? Is it this in terms of CPU, in terms of memory? Again, similar to what we saw before, this server, you see it has 16 CPU cores allocated to it, but on average, it's using 0%. It's got a peak CPU usage of 2%. You can definitely reduce this to help reduce costs. So it can help save money, of course, before and after migrations as well. So I think that's kind of a brief overview of the Faddom's migration capabilities. And I think from here I can hand it back to Matan.
Thanks, Ofer, for the great demo. Now let's talk about the preventable pitfalls with application dependency mapping and the do's and don'ts of cloud migration to ensure a smooth migration. Mark, back to you.
Thank you. So as you saw, Ofer did the presentation for you on what we can do with the tool, and it's one of the reasons why ePlus utilizes this tool in its toolbox for migrations and for disaster recovery and any number of other solutions that the data comes in handy for. So on my first slide, I talked about roughly a top 10 list of things that are common pitfalls for migration. And what you'll notice from this list is it's the same list, except we've weeded it down to the 7 different pitfalls that we can solve by using the Faddom application. So compatibility issues, Ofer showed you how we can identify mismatched software. He showed you, all kinds of linked data sources that we are accounted for. He dove into mission critical services and phase migration and the migration waves and how we can plan those and how we can see the dependencies in our migration waves and understand what needs to get moved and why. Degradation from performance, we mapped, he can map the resource needs and optimize the provisioning. We can reduce those CPUs. We can reduce that memory so that we can save ourselves cloud resource costs. Obviously, their number one reason for moving to the cloud should never be because it's cheaper, because it never will be. But there are things that you can do to help you reduce the cost of your cloud migration project. He showed you in network settings. He showed you some firewall rules and the ports that would have to be open for the traffic to traverse from the on-prem to the cloud, and what those ports and protocols and what direction that information would be traveling. He also showed you, he touched on briefly some of the vulnerabilities and unsecured connections, authentication gaps that you can visualize with the Faddom tool. So this is a huge amount of data at your fingertips in an agentless solution that you can stand up in your environment for less than 2 hours. And given a 24-hour runtime capturing this data, you now have visibility into a whole host of metrics that you did not have at your disposal or your fingertips previously. This is a great tool, not only for the migration part of the solution, but for visibility, for giving your server owners visibility into what the app owners are doing, and the app owners visibility into what the server. So everybody is on the same page now. So when you provision a server to an application group and they say, yeah, we just need it to have this much CPU, this much memory, give it to us and we'll do the rest. Well, you have no idea at this point now, once you've handed it over to the application team, what you need to build out for your backup solution, or how we're going to support this application or this server going forward, or what else do we need to back up as a result. So having this visibility at your fingertips allows you to create those application groupings that you saw and gives you those nice colorful boxes that you can put in each tier. So you have your clients coming into your application. They potentially are going through a load balancer. The load balancer will show up on your application map. From there, you're going to have dual communication, right? Going to multiple different facets within the environment. You're going to have your tier 1, might be your front end server that then talks to your SQL database backend server, right? There could be a cloud component to it. All of this is at your fingertips with the metrics to show you the networking, the bandwidth, the directional, the ports, the up down, how often these communications are happening in your environment. When and if a change happens, let's say you've now stood up another server and you've replaced that backend database. So now the software is automatically going to go, okay, well, now I see that this communication no longer exists in the environment, and instead I have a communication to this new server. Well, now I see that in real time because the colors of the maps will change and the lines get different. So all of this information at your fingertips is just a huge win, and it's not something that I have had the ability, I have seen in the marketplace previously, with the ease of setup and use that you will have with this tool. Relying on NetFlow traffic and not having to rely on putting an agent on environments that have 10,000 plus VMs is an incredible cost benefit and time saving. So it's not adding additional resources and contention into an environment to pull this data from. It's very lightweight. So this is one of the reasons why it's used in our practice for, like I said, a whole host of different engagements. Predominantly cloud migrations, disaster recovery migrations, and things of the lot. We're doing it a lot with network segmentation, right? Having understanding the ports and the firewalls, very important for that. So a great tool that can help check a lot of the boxes that we talked about that are the common pitfalls of migration. Awesome. So let's move on to some of the more common do's and don'ts. All right, once again, kind of sent this out to my team and said, hey guys, tell me what you think are some of the more common do's, and then sure enough, we're going to talk about the don'ts as well, right? Well, first and foremost, right size your VMs to reduce costs. We've touched on that, right? The ability to understand what the VM is doing in your environment today and understand if it's going to need those same resources moving forward. So right sizing that. Don't lift and shift. Unless you are up against a timeline that is going to cost substantial money, there's no reason to look at moving oversized VMs to Azure or any CSP, really. Understand your network traffic patterns and requirements. Once again, this is visibility that we have with the Faddom tool. We can see that bandwidth coming through. We can see the direction of the flow. Don't oversize and overspend on cloud networking without data and metrics. That can be a very costly metric that you don't account for when you're moving to the cloud. It's not always about the instance type and the speed. It's also about how much traffic are we sending to that in that instance. Use cloud native services and paths when possible. So get these things out of your environment. Get it as a service. Get it out on the internet. Don't host it if you don't need to. If you can move your exchange to O365, then do that. That gives less resources that you have to maintain and pay for in the cloud. Focus on security before you begin. This is not something that you should not be doing after the fact. You have to have a strong security place and plan in place for what's going to happen when these instances are now out in the cloud. Do not plan to go back to security after the migration. That's your don't, right? Create a full cost assessment and TCO review. This is one of the things that we do. We come in and I'll help you to create this for you, and we deploy Faddom in the environment, and then for our assessment, and then we try we want you to keep it in your environment for the visibility for the duration of the migration plan, because the data being dynamic and live is very, very valuable at every point during your migration plan. Use an experienced vendor like ePlus. Well, I wouldn't, be on here if I wasn't going to tout my name a little bit, right? So you should definitely reach out to us, at IT services, somebody who does this day in and day out, so that they can help you with these do's and don'ts and the pitfalls and where to go and what not to do, those kinds of things, right? Review your management logging, monitoring, and other tools. Faddom is a great tool. It gets you 90% of the way, but there are other tools that you're going to want to look at that Faddom doesn't necessarily touch on. So those tools are important, and they give you in metrics and visibility that you also need for a successful migration. Obviously, always plan to continue modernizing and optimizing what you're doing. Don't just stop with the lift and shift. Too costly. Lift and shift's the easiest. It's the easy button, if you will, but it's also the costliest button, and it will come back and get you because it's substantially more expensive to do that in the long term. Establish ongoing practices around cost management, resource management, cloud hygiene. So just because you've moved it to the cloud doesn't mean that it's just going to take care of itself and self-heal. You still have to go through and manage it and understand what it's doing and optimize it to see if there's savings that can be had, month over month over month. So it's not just a set it and forget it. You have to continually maintain that cloud presence as well. Okay, plan and have a clear purpose and goals. Great for migrating. This goes back to our pitfalls, our number one pitfall, right? Not rushing, making sure you have a clear plan of how you're going to get from A to Z, and not being in a hurry to get there when you can. Sometimes that's beyond your control. You assess, right? The scope is where, the rationalization, and the how, the ADM. Don't oversimplify and assume. You measure 2 times and you cut 1 time, right? That way you don't come back and burn yourself in the long run. So the don'ts are basically the opposite of the do's on these, right? You don't want to move the oversized VMs to Azure. You want to make sure they're optimized. You don't want to oversize and overspend on cloud networking without data and metrics, which you will get with your Faddom tool. Lift and shift all VMs without planning and optimization is not something you want to do. That's going to cause an incredible amount of cost in the cloud. You do not want to plan to go back on your security architecture after you migrate. It's too late. You ought to know what you're doing before you do it. You don't want to assume that the cloud will be less expensive, because in almost every instance, I'm here to tell you, it will not. You don't want to try to build and migrate on your own. I mean, some customers have the ability and the skill sets in-house, but they don't have the time. to maintain their existing job requirements and try to take on a project this size and complexity. So don't feel like that, you know, you can't ask for help on these cases. We understand that you have a job day to day and that you have this big project at your fingertips that you also have to handle. That's where a company like us comes in to assist with that. We're not taking it over. We're just helping you fill in the blanks and give you an extra set of hands to help you, move the needle a little bit. Don't attempt to migrate on an unachievable timeline. Doesn't matter what your boss says. If you can't do it, you're going to fail, and it's only going to cost the company more money and downtime if you try to rush it and you aren't successful. Don't assume that what you use today is the most effective option in the cloud. Cloud configurations and licensing and the way that they are doing it constantly evolves and changes, and you have to stay on top of that. And don't stop with the lift and shift. We touched on that. And of course, don't let costs continually rise with unnecessary resources in the cloud. This is, again, where you've moved it over to the cloud, but you haven't continually optimized it and maintained it in the cloud. So that cost has crept up on you, and you get this huge bill in the mail now saying that you owe a lot of money because you didn't optimize what you were doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We covered quite a lot of ground today. Thank you for our speakers today. Thank you, Ofer, Itamar. Thank you, Mark, for the insights. If you're ready to simplify your migration process, we encourage you to test drive Faddom. We offer 14-day of free trial. There's also a link in the chat to book a demo. For the clients in the audience, don't forget to reach out to your customer success manager for more details. Again, thank you very much for this webinar. A lot of things that we covered and a lot of really takeaways that we got from this webinar. We look forward to supporting you in cloud migrations during 2025 and beyond. And that's it from our side. Thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you, Matan, for hosting. Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure. Thank you for your questions.
Get started now with self-service. No credit card or sales call is needed.